Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're diving into some stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about trust, loyalty, and family bonds. These are the kind of tales that keep you up at night, the ones that make you grateful for the quiet moments in your own life. So get comfortable, maybe grab a warm drink, and let's explore some of the most shocking stories the internet has to offer. Before we start, I just want to say thank you for being here. Whether you're winding down after a long day, taking a break from studying, or just looking for something to listen to while you build in Minecraft, I appreciate you spending this time with me. Your support means everything. Our first story comes from someone who discovered a betrayal so deep, so fundamentally wrong, that it shattered their entire understanding of family. This is about trust broken in the worst possible way, about secrets kept by the people who should have been honest, and about the moment when everything you believed turns out to be a lie. I'm 30 years old, and I thought I knew my family. My sister is just a year older than me, 31, and we've always been close. Or at least, I thought we were close. Growing up, we shared everything. Our rooms were next to each other, we went to the same schools, had overlapping friend groups. She was my person, you know, the one I'd call when something good happened, the one I'd vent to when life got hard. We went to the same college, different majors, but same campus, and we'd meet up for lunch at least twice a week. After graduation, we both stayed in the same city. She got into marketing, I went into graphic design. We'd still hang out regularly, do sister brunches on Sundays, text each other random memes throughout the day. It felt like we were doing life together, like we'd always have each other's backs. 5 years ago, I met Logan. He was everything I'd been looking for, without really knowing I was looking. Kind, funny, ambitious, but grounded. He worked in finance, but wasn't one of those insufferable finance bros. We connected immediately, like we'd known each other forever. Our first date turned into a 6-hour conversation at a coffee shop, and the barista had to literally tell us they were closing. Within 6 months, we'd moved in together. Within a year, he proposed. It was perfect, everything I dreamed about. He took me to this beautiful garden at sunset, got down on one knee, and I swear I started crying before he even finished asking. Of course I said yes. How could I not? My sister was thrilled for me. At least, that's what she said. She helped me pick out wedding dresses, came with me to venue tours, threw me an incredible bridal shower. She was going to be my maid of honor, obviously. Who else would it be? The wedding was planned for this past August. We'd booked everything, sent out, saved the dates, the whole 9 yards. I was so excited I could barely sleep. Logan and I would stay up late talking about our future, about the kids we'd have someday, about growing old together. It was the kind of happiness that feels almost unreal, like something from a movie. That happiness lasted until 3 weeks ago. I was at Logan's apartment one afternoon while he was at work. He'd asked me to grab his laptop charger because his was broken and I had a spare. I knew his computer password. We'd always been open like that. No secrets. I went to his desk, opened his laptop to make sure it was charging properly, and that's when I saw it. His email was open. I wasn't trying to snoop, I swear, but the preview pane was right there, and I saw my sister's name. Multiple times. Recent emails, dozens of them. My stomach dropped even before I understood why. I clicked on one, then another, then another. I read through months of correspondence, and with each message, my world fell apart a little more. They'd been sleeping together, not a one-time mistake, not a drunken moment of weakness, a full-blown affair that had been going on for 6 months. 6 months of lies, of them sneaking around behind my back, of my sister looking me in the eye and helping me plan my wedding while she was sleeping with my fiancé. The emails were explicit, detailed. They talked about their encounters, about how excited they were to see each other, about how guilty they felt, but how they couldn't stop. There were messages about close calls, times when they almost got caught. Logan had apparently taken her to hotels on nights when I thought he was working late. My sister would text me about her day while literally being with him. The worst part, the absolute worst part, was reading how they talked about me. Logan called me sweet but clueless. My sister said I was too trusting for my own good, and that she felt bad but couldn't help herself. They joked about it. They actually joked about betraying me. I sat there at his desk for I don't know how long, just staring at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. Part of me wanted to believe it was fake, that I was misunderstanding something, but it was all right there in black and white. Undeniable. Devastating. When Logan got home that evening, I was still there, still at his desk. He walked in with his usual smile, asking how my day was, and I just turned the laptop toward him, showed him what I'd found. The smile vanished instantly. He went pale, started stammering, trying to explain. But what explanation could there possibly be? He said it just happened. That's what they always say, right? Like it was some force of nature, something beyond their control. He said he loved me, but there was something about my sister that he couldn't resist. He said they'd tried to stop multiple times but kept gravitating back to each other. He actually had the audacity to ask if we could work through it, if we could go to counselling. I told him to leave. Actually, I screamed at him to get out. I packed up everything I'd left at his place, threw his key at him, and walked out. I haven't spoken to him since. But the sister situation, that was harder. Because it wasn't just a relationship ending. It was my whole family, my childhood, every memory I had of us together. How do you process the fact that the person you trusted most in the world could do something like this? I couldn't bring myself to confront her immediately. I needed time to think, to figure out what I even wanted to say. But apparently, Logan told her I knew. She started blowing up my phone, calling and texting non-stop. I ignored every single message for 2 days. Finally, she showed up at my apartment, just appeared at my door, crying, begging me to let her in so we could talk. I almost didn't open it, but I needed answers. I needed to understand how this could happen. She came in and immediately started with excuses. It wasn't planned. She never meant for it to happen. She loved me and never wanted to hurt me. All the classic lines that mean absolutely nothing when you've done the worst thing imaginable. I asked her when it started. She said it began 4 months after Logan and I got engaged. They'd run into each other at a coffee shop, started talking, and ended up getting drinks. One thing led to another. That phrase, one thing led to another, like it's some inevitable chain of events, rather than a series of choices they both made. I asked her why she kept helping with wedding planning if she was sleeping with my fiancé. She said she thought it would stop, that she kept trying to end it, but couldn't. She said she was planning to tell me everything after the wedding, like that would have been somehow better. Like finding out my marriage was built on betrayal would have hurt less than finding out my engagement was. The conversation went in circles. She cried. I yelled. She made excuses. I called her out. At one point she actually said she was jealous of me, jealous of how easy everything came to me, how I'd found Logan and it all seemed so perfect, as if that justified anything. Then came the part that really broke me. I asked if anyone else knew. She went quiet. That silence told me everything I needed to know, but I pressed her anyway. Who else knew about this? My mother knew. My own mother had known for 2 months that my sister was sleeping with my fiancé, and she'd said nothing. My sister had broken down and confessed to her, looking for advice or absolution or whatever, and my mum had told her to end it quietly and never tell me. Better that I not know, apparently. Better that I marry someone who'd betrayed me than deal with the truth. I called my mum immediately, right there with my sister still in my apartment. My mum tried to defend herself, said she was trying to protect me from being hurt. I told her that her silence was its own betrayal, that by keeping this secret she'd chosen my sister over me. She started crying, saying that wasn't true, that she loved both her daughters and didn't want to see either of us in pain. But she did see me in pain, eventually. She just chose when and how it would happen by keeping quiet. And in doing so, she let me waste months of my life planning a wedding that should never have happened. I told my sister to leave, told my mum I needed space. That was 3 weeks ago, and I haven't spoken to either of them since. My sister has tried to reach out countless times. She's sent long text messages apologizing, flowers to my apartment, even tried to get mutual friends to mediate. My mum calls every few days, leaving voicemails about how we need to work through this as a family. But I don't know if I can. How do you forgive something like this? How do you rebuild trust that's been destroyed so completely? My sister didn't just betray me once. She betrayed me over and over, for months, every time she looked at me and pretended everything was normal. Every time she helped me address wedding invitations or pick out bridesmaid dresses, knowing she was sleeping with the groom. And my mum, by staying silent, told me that keeping the peace was more important than my right to know the truth. She put my sister's comfort above my dignity. I cancelled the wedding, obviously. Had to contact all the vendors, lose deposits, send messages to everyone who'd gotten a save the date. It was humiliating, having to explain over and over why the wedding was off. Some people were supportive, others were clearly gossiping. A few mutual friends took my sister's side, said I was being too harsh, that everyone makes mistakes. But this wasn't a mistake. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something hurtful in an argument. This was deliberate, repeated betrayal by the two people who should have been most loyal to me. I've been in therapy, trying to process all of this. My therapist keeps saying I need to feel my feelings, that it's okay to be angry, that healing takes time. But some days I'm not even angry. Some days I'm just sad. Sad for the relationship with my sister that's probably gone forever. Sad for the future I'd planned with Logan that'll never happen. Sad for the version of myself from 6 months ago who was so happy and trusting and naive. I've started the process of moving on. Got a new apartment in a different part of the city, somewhere with no memories attached. Threw myself into work, picked up new hobbies, started going to a gym where nobody knows me. I'm rebuilding, piece by piece, but it's slow. The hardest part is that I lost 3 people that day I found those emails. My fiancé, my sister, and in a way, my mother. The family I thought I had doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it never did. Maybe I was just too trusting, too willing to believe the best in people, like Logan and my sister said in those emails. But I don't think being trusting is a flaw. I think betraying someone's trust is the flaw, and I refuse to let their actions change who I am fundamentally. I'm still the person who believes in loyalty and honesty. I just know now that not everyone shares those values, even people who claim to love you. Sometimes late at night, when I can't sleep, I wonder if there were signs I missed. Were there moments when they seemed too close, too friendly? Times when their stories didn't quite add up? Or was I just so secure in my relationships that I never thought to question anything? I'll probably never know. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe picking apart the past looking for clues would just hurt more. What I do know is that I deserve better. Better than a fiancé who would cheat with my own sister. Better than a sister who would betray me in the worst possible way. Better than a mother who would value keeping secrets over protecting me from being lied to. I'm 29 now, almost 30, and I'm starting over. It's terrifying and lonely, and some days I don't think I can do it, but I am doing it. One day at a time, one step at a time, I'm building a new life that doesn't include them. And you know what? I'm starting to realize that losing people who could hurt you this badly isn't actually a loss at all. It's a revelation. It's painful, but it's also clarity. So that's my story. The story of how I discovered that the people closest to me were the ones who hurt me most. It's not a happy story, not yet anyway, but maybe someday it will be. Maybe someday I'll look back on this as the moment everything changed for the better, even though right now it just feels like everything fell apart. If you're going through something similar, if you've been betrayed by people you loved, I want you to know you're not alone. It's not your fault, and you will get through this, even when it feels impossible. Let's move on to another story, because sometimes hearing about other people's struggles helps us feel less alone in our own. This next one is about a different kind of family betrayal, one that shows how money and inheritance can bring out the absolute worst in people, even siblings who you thought you knew. I'm 27, and I just lost my father 6 months ago. He was only 58, way too young, and it was sudden, a heart attack while he was on his morning run. One day he was here, healthy and active and making plans for the future, and the next day he was gone. It's the kind of loss that doesn't feel real for a long time. My dad was an amazing man. He'd built a successful business from nothing, worked his way up from having literally zero to being quite comfortable financially. He owned a small chain of restaurants, 5 locations across our state, and they did well, really well. but he never forgot where he came from, never got arrogant or flashy about his success. He was generous with his money, but smart about it. Helped put all 3 of his kids through college with no debt. Set up trust funds for his future grandchildren. Donated regularly to charity. He believed in taking care of family and giving back to the community. I have 2 older brothers, Marcus and David. Marcus is 33, David is 30. Growing up, we were close. Normal sibling stuff, you know. We'd fight over toys and video games, team up against our parents when needed, had each other's backs at school. As adults, we stayed in touch but weren't super close. Different lives, different cities, different priorities. But I thought we were solid. I thought when things got hard, we'd be there for each other. When Dad died, it was Marcus who took charge. He's the oldest, always been the responsible one, so it made sense. He helped Mom with all the arrangements, handled the lawyer meetings, dealt with the business stuff. David and I were both kind of a mess, grieving and barely functional, so we were grateful to have Marcus handling things. The will reading was scheduled for 3 weeks after the funeral. Dad's lawyer, Mr. Patterson, had been his attorney for years. We all gathered at his office, the 4 of us. Mum, Marcus, David, and me. I remember being nervous, but not really knowing why. Dad had always said he'd take care of all of us, that we'd all be okay. Mr. Patterson read through the will. There was some standard stuff first. Instructions about the funeral, personal effects going to specific people. Then came the big stuff, the business and the money. Dad had set it up so Mom would be financially secure for life, with the house paid off and a significant trust that would pay her a monthly income. That was exactly what we'd all expected and wanted. She'd been with him since they were teenagers, supported him through everything, and she deserved to be taken care of. Then came the part about the business and the rest of the estate. Dad had been very specific about how he wanted things divided. The business would be sold, and the proceeds, along with his other assets, would be split evenly among his 3 children, 1/3 each. Equal shares. That was important to him. That all his kids would be treated the same. The estimated value of everything that would be split between us was substantial. After taxes and everything else, we were each looking at roughly $800,000. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having. Life-changing money. But here's where things get complicated. Dad's will also specified that Marcus would be the executor. Marcus would oversee selling the business, managing the estate, making sure everything was distributed correctly. It made sense at the time because Marcus worked in business management. He understood all the legal and financial stuff. Dad trusted him to do it right. The first few months after the reading, Marcus kept us updated regularly. He'd hired a business broker to sell the restaurants, was working with accountants to handle the estate, was managing everything that needed to be managed. He'd send these long, detailed emails every couple weeks explaining where things stood, what was happening next, when we could expect things to be finalised. David and I both thanked him constantly for handling everything. It was a lot of work, we knew that, and we appreciated him taking it on. We told him multiple times that we were grateful, that we knew this was time-consuming and stressful, on top of dealing with his own grief. About 4 months after Dad died, Marcus told us he'd found a buyer for the restaurants. A group of investors who wanted to keep them running as is, same name, same concept. They'd just take over ownership. The offer was good, he said, fair market value. He'd had the business appraised by 2 different firms, and the offer was right in line with those appraisals. We scheduled a family meeting to go over the details. Marcus came to Mom's house with a bunch of paperwork and a presentation he'd put together. He walked us through everything. The offer, the timeline, what would happen next. He said if we all agreed, he could move forward with the sale, and we'd have our inheritance within about 2 months. David and I were thrilled. The idea of having that money, of being able to pay off student loans, buy houses, start our own families without financial stress, it was incredible. We told Marcus to move forward. Mum agreed too. We signed whatever papers we needed to sign, and Marcus took care of the rest. 2 months later, Marcus called a family meeting, said everything had gone through, the sale was final, and he was ready to distribute the inheritance. We met at his house this time, and he had everything organised. Cheques ready to be handed out, final accounting of all the estate expenses, everything documented and professional. He gave Mum her cheque first. then David and I. I looked down at mine and my stomach dropped. It was for $250,000. Not $800,000. Not even close. I looked up at Marcus, confused. David was staring at his check too, same amount as mine. Marcus was watching us with this expression I couldn't quite read. I asked what happened. Where was the rest? Marcus sighed, like he'd been expecting this question and was tired of it already. He explained that there had been more expenses than anticipated. Legal fees, business broker fees, taxes, estate settlement costs. All of which was true. Those things do add up. But not $550,000 worth per person. David asked for an accounting, a breakdown of where all that money went. Marcus got defensive, said he'd been working on this for months, handling everything while we did nothing, and now we were questioning him? He said he had all the documentation if we really wanted to see it, but it was hundreds of pages and would take hours to go through. Something felt wrong. The numbers didn't make sense. I'd done some research online about estate costs, talked to a friend who's a lawyer, and what Marcus was describing seemed way too high. I pushed back, said I wanted to see the documentation. Marcus got angry, told me I was being ungrateful, that he'd spent months of his life managing all this while juggling his own job and family, and this was the thanks he got. He said if I trusted him so little, maybe I should hire my own lawyer to go through everything. So I did. I hired an attorney who specialized in estate law and gave him everything Marcus had given me. It took 3 weeks, but my attorney found it. Marcus had been lying. The business had actually sold for significantly more than he'd told us. He'd also inflated various expenses, in some cases paying himself or companies he had connections with for services that were either unnecessary or overcharged. And in a few cases, he'd simply moved money to accounts we didn't know about. When my attorney calculated what our shares should have actually been, it came out to just over $700,000 each. Marcus had stolen nearly $1.5 million from his own family. I confronted him with the evidence. At first he denied everything, said my attorney didn't know what he was talking about, that the numbers were complicated and being misinterpreted. But when I pointed to specific transactions, specific inflated charges, specific accounts where money had been moved, he finally admitted it. His justification was insane. He said he deserved more because he'd done all the work. He'd spent months managing the estate while David and I did nothing. He'd dealt with the stress, the responsibility, the time away from his own job. He felt he was entitled to extra compensation for all of that. I told him that's what executor fees are for. If he wanted to be paid for his work, he should have taken a reasonable executor fee, not stolen from his siblings. He said the standard executor fee wouldn't have been nearly enough for all the work he did. David was there for this conversation too. He was shaking. He was so angry. He'd trusted Marcus completely, never questioned anything, and now he was finding out our oldest brother had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from each of us. We told Marcus he needed to return the money immediately or we'd take legal action. He laughed. Actually laughed and said, "Go ahead, sue me if you want. You'll spend more on lawyers than you'll get back, and it'll tear the family apart even more than it already is." He had a point about the family being torn apart. Mom was devastated when we told her what happened. She couldn't believe her oldest son would do something like this. She tried to get him to make it right, begged him to just return the money and apologize. He refused, said what was done, and we all needed to move on. David and I did hire attorneys. We filed a lawsuit against Marcus for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and theft. It's been 2 months now, and the case is moving forward. Marcus has his own lawyers, of course, and they're fighting everything, claiming the accounting was accurate, that we're misunderstanding complex financial transactions, that we're just greedy and trying to get more than our fair share. The lawsuit is expensive and emotionally exhausting. Every document we file, every deposition we sit through, it's all a reminder that this is our brother we're fighting against. The person who taught me how to ride a bike when I was 6, the person who helped me study for college entrance exams, the person I thought would always be on my side. Mum is caught in the middle, trying to maintain relationships with all 3 of her sons while watching us go to war with each other. She's aged 10 years in the past few months. The stress is literally making her sick. Marcus's wife left him, actually. She didn't know about any of this until we filed the lawsuit. When she found out what he'd done, she was horrified. She's moved out and filed for divorce. Said she couldn't be married to someone capable of stealing from his own family. The saddest part is that none of this was necessary. If Marcus had just been honest from the beginning, if he'd distributed everything fairly like Dad wanted, we'd all have been fine. We'd all have had plenty of money. We'd still have each other. We'd still be a family. But greed ruined all of that. Marcus wanted more than his share, and in trying to get it, he lost everything. His marriage, his relationship with his siblings, his mother's respect, his own integrity. Sometimes I think about what Dad would say if he knew this was happening. He worked so hard to build something to leave for all of us, to make sure we'd all be taken care of, and one of his sons took that gift and twisted it into something ugly and selfish. The lawsuit will probably settle eventually. Our attorneys seem confident we'll get most of the money back, though not all of it. But even if we do, even if Marcus is forced to pay back every dollar he stole, the damage is done. The trust is broken. The family is fractured beyond repair. I used to have 2 brothers. Now I have 1 brother and 1 stranger who happens to share my DNA. That's what Marcus is to me now. A stranger. Someone I used to know who turned out to be someone completely different than I thought. David and I are closer than ever, bonded by this shared betrayal, and Mum is doing her best to heal and move forward. But there's a Marcus-shaped hole in our family now, and I don't think it'll ever be filled. This wasn't the inheritance Dad intended to leave us. He wanted to leave us security and opportunity and peace of mind. Instead, what we got was betrayal and loss, and the knowledge that even the people you trust most can turn on you if the price is right. That's a heavy lesson to learn, but I guess it's an important one. Trust is precious, family should be sacred, and when someone violates both, the consequences echo for years. Let's shift gears to another story, because there are so many ways that trust can be broken, so many situations where people's true colours show themselves. This one is about workplace dynamics and how sometimes the people we work with every day are hiding things that would shock us if we knew. I worked at a mid-sized marketing agency for 4 years. It was my first real job out of college, and I loved it. The work was interesting, the clients were mostly reasonable, and I'd made genuine friends among my co-workers. It felt like more than just a job. It felt like I was building a career and a community. There were about 40 of us in the office, small enough that everyone knew everyone, but big enough that there were different teams and specializations. I was on the creative team, doing copywriting and content strategy. It was exactly what I wanted to be doing. My closest friend at work was Amy. She'd started a few months before me, and we'd bonded immediately. We had lunch together almost every day, vented to each other about difficult clients, collaborated on projects when we could. Outside of work, we'd hang out on weekends, went to concerts together, became real friends beyond just being co-workers. Amy was dating someone she'd met on a dating app about a year into working at the agency. His name was Ryan, and from what she told me, he seemed great. She was really happy with him, talked about their future together, about moving in together eventually. I was excited for her. About 3 years into my time at the agency, we hired a new guy for the creative team. His name was Mark, and he was talented but quiet, kept to himself mostly, did good work but didn't socialise much. Which was fine. Not everyone needs to be best friends with their co-workers, but it meant I didn't really know him beyond the professional level. One day, I had to work late to finish a project that had a tight deadline. It was around 7 in the evening, and most people had already left. I was at my desk, deep in concentration, when I heard voices from the conference room down the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and at first I didn't pay attention. But then I recognized Amy's laugh, that specific giggle she does when she's flirting. I'm not proud of this, but curiosity got the better of me. I quietly walked closer to the conference room and peeked through the gap in the door. Amy was in there with Mark. They were sitting close together on the couch we have in there, and as I watched, he leaned in and kissed her. And she kissed him back. Not a friendly peck, a real kiss, the kind that makes it very clear what's going on between them. I backed away quickly, my heart racing. This was wrong on so many levels. Amy had a boyfriend. She was still with Ryan as far as I knew. And now she was kissing Mark in our office conference room? I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to burst in there and ask what the hell was going on. Part of me wanted to pretend I'd never seen anything. I ended up going back to my desk, grabbing my stuff, and leaving without saying anything to either of them. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Amy was my best friend. Shouldn't I talk to her about this? But what would I even say? I'd been spying on her, essentially. And maybe there was some explanation I didn't know about. Maybe she and Ryan had broken up and she just hadn't told me yet. I decided to wait and see if Amy would bring it up. We had lunch the next day, like usual, and I waited for her to mention something, anything that would explain what I'd seen. But she didn't. She talked about her weekend plans with Ryan, about a restaurant they were trying, about how things were going well with him. She was lying to my face, or at least hiding something huge while acting like everything was normal. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I'd missed before. Amy and Mark would exchange glances across the office. They'd volunteer for the same projects. I'd see them talking quietly in corners, and they'd stop when someone else approached. It was all so obvious now that I was looking for it. How had I not noticed before? I was torn. On one hand, Amy's personal life was her business. Who was I to judge or interfere? On the other hand, we were supposed to be best friends. The fact that she was hiding this from me felt like its own betrayal. And what about Ryan? He was being cheated on, didn't he deserve to know? I decided to talk to Amy directly. I asked her to get coffee one afternoon after work, somewhere we could talk privately. Once we sat down, I just came out and said it. I told her what I'd seen in the conference room. Amy's face went through about 5 different expressions in 3 seconds. Shock, denial, anger, fear, and finally, resignation. She asked how long I'd known, and I told her. Then she started crying. She said it wasn't supposed to happen. She loved Ryan, she really did, but there was something about Mark that she couldn't resist. They'd been working together on a project, started talking more, realized they had this connection. It had started as an emotional affair before becoming physical. She knew it was wrong. She felt horrible about it. But she couldn't seem to stop. I asked her what she was going to do. Was she going to break up with Ryan, or end things with Mark? She said she didn't know. She was paralyzed by the situation, didn't want to hurt Ryan, but wasn't ready to give up whatever she had with Mark. I told her she needed to figure it out, that stringing both of them along wasn't fair to anyone. She agreed, but didn't actually commit to doing anything. She just asked me not to tell anyone, especially not anyone at work. She said if their boss found out, there could be consequences, since office relationships were technically against company policy. I promised I wouldn't say anything, though I felt gross about it. I didn't want to be complicit in her lies. But she was my friend, and I didn't want to betray her trust either. Things continued like this for another month. Amy kept dating Ryan while sneaking around with Mark. I kept her secret, even though it was eating at me. Our friendship felt different now, strained. I couldn't look at her the same way. Then one day, Ryan showed up at our office. He looked upset, stressed. He asked to speak to Amy privately, and they went into one of the conference rooms. Through the glass wall, I could see them having what was clearly an intense conversation. Ryan was talking animatedly, Amy was crying, and then suddenly Ryan stormed out, not even looking at anyone as he left. Amy came back to her desk about 10 minutes later, eyes red, and immediately left for the day. She texted me that evening. Ryan had found out about Mark. Someone had seen Amy and Mark together somewhere and told him. He'd broken up with her on the spot, said he never wanted to see her again. Amy was devastated. She said she realized too late that she'd made a terrible mistake, that she should have ended things with Mark right at the beginning, that she'd ruined the best relationship she'd ever had for something that was never going to be real. I wanted to feel sympathetic, but honestly, I mostly felt like this was the consequence of her choices. She'd had multiple opportunities to do the right thing, and she'd chosen not to. Now she was dealing with the fallout. But it got worse. Ryan was friends with one of the partners at our agency, and when he found out that Mark worked there, that the affair had been happening at the office, he told the partner everything. The partner was furious about the situation, about the company policy being violated, about the unprofessional behaviour. Within a week, both Amy and Mark were fired. Not for the affair exactly, but for violating company policy about workplace relationships and for creating what the company called a hostile work environment through their secretive behaviour. It was wrapped up in HR language, but everyone knew what had really happened. Amy called me that night after she was let go, sobbing, saying her life was falling apart. She'd lost her job, lost Ryan, and Mark had told her that he wasn't looking for anything serious anyway, that he thought they were just having fun. She'd destroyed her relationship and her career for someone who never even saw her as more than a fling. I tried to be supportive, but it was hard. I'd watched her make these choices over and over, had seen her lie to Ryan's face, had watched her risk everything for something she knew was wrong, and now she was surprised that it had blown up in her face? Our friendship didn't survive it. Amy moved back to her hometown a month later, started over somewhere new. We texted a few times after she left, but it petered out quickly. There wasn't much left to say. The whole situation taught me a lot about people and choices and consequences. Amy wasn't a bad person. She was someone who made bad choices, who let herself get caught up in something exciting without thinking about the harm she was causing, and in the end, she paid the price for that. But so did Ryan, who'd done nothing wrong except trust someone who betrayed him. And so did our workplace, which lost 2 employees and gained a bunch of awkward gossip and tension. Bad choices ripple outward, affecting more people than just the ones who make them. I think about Amy sometimes, wonder how she's doing, if she learned anything from what happened. I hope she did. I hope she's with someone now who she treats with the honesty and respect that Ryan deserved. I hope she's learned that the excitement of a secret affair is never worth the destruction it causes. Because in the end, all she got from those months of sneaking around was loneliness, unemployment, and the knowledge that she'd thrown away something real for something that was never going to last. Let's talk about another kind of betrayal now, one that happens in families but in a different way than the stories we've covered so far. I'm 42 years old, and I have a daughter who's 16. Her name is Emma, and she's pretty much my entire world. I've been a single dad since she was 3, after my wife passed away from cancer. It's been just the 2 of us for most of Emma's life, and we've made it work. We're close, we communicate well, we have each other's backs. Or at least, I thought we did. 3 months ago, I was going through some mail and found a credit card statement that I didn't recognize. It was addressed to me, but it wasn't from any credit card company I had an account with. I almost threw it away, thinking it was junk mail or maybe someone else's mail delivered to our address by mistake. But something made me open it, and when I did, I saw charges. Lots of charges. Shopping sites, restaurants, online games, streaming services. Thousands of dollars worth of charges over the past 6 months. My first thought was identity theft. Someone must have opened a credit card in my name and been using it. I was already mentally preparing to call the credit card company and report fraud when I looked closer at some of the charges. One was to a store Emma had mentioned going to with friends. Another was to a game that she played constantly. The restaurants were all places near her school. The pattern was obvious once I saw it. Emma had opened a credit card in my name and had been using it for months. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My daughter, the person I trusted more than anyone in the world, had stolen my identity and racked up over $8,000 in charges. How? Why? We weren't poor. She had an allowance. If she needed something, she could ask me. I waited until she got home from school that day to confront her about it. I showed her the statement, and the colour drained from her face immediately. She knew she was caught. I asked her to explain. She started crying, saying she was sorry, that she knew it was wrong, that she'd been planning to figure out how to pay it back before I found out. But none of that explained how or why this had happened. Eventually, between tears, she told me the whole story. It had started with her friends. They all had credit cards, either their own or access to their parents' cards, and they'd go shopping together. Emma felt left out, felt like she was the only one who couldn't buy things whenever she wanted. She'd asked me a few months before all this about getting her own credit card. I'd said no, that she was too young, that when she got a job and showed she could be responsible with money, we'd talk about it. I'd meant it as a reasonable parenting decision, teaching her about financial responsibility. But she'd taken it as rejection, as me not trusting her or treating her like a child. So she'd decided to get a credit card on her own. She'd found my personal information in my office, tax documents, and bank statements I'd left in a file cabinet that wasn't locked. She'd used that information to apply for a credit card online, had it sent to our address, and intercepted it when it arrived. I work long hours, and she gets home from school before I get home from work, so it wasn't hard for her to get the mail first. At first, she said, she'd only planned to use it a little, just enough to buy a few things so her friends wouldn't think she was poor or weird. But once she had it, it became so easy to justify more purchases. A new outfit here, dinner with friends there, in-app purchases for games, subscriptions to services all her friends had. She thought she'd be able to pay it back somehow. She was planning to get a summer job and use that money. But summer was months away, and the balance had grown much faster than she'd anticipated. I was so angry I could barely speak. This wasn't just about the money, though $8,000 was a lot. It was about trust. She'd stolen from me, lied to me every single day for months. She'd committed fraud, which is a serious crime, all because she wanted to fit in with her friends. I told her she was grounded indefinitely. No phone except for emergencies, no computer except for homework under my supervision, no going out with friends. I also told her she would be paying back every cent of that $8,000, even if it took years. She cried and apologized over and over, but I was too hurt and angry to really hear it. I needed time to process what had happened. Over the next few days, I had to deal with the practical aspects. I called the credit card company and explained the situation. They were surprisingly understanding. They cancelled the card immediately and, because it was clearly fraud, they actually forgave most of the debt. I only ended up having to pay back about $1,000, which felt like getting off incredibly easy given the circumstances. But the credit card company also warned me that if they filed a police report, which they were considering, Emma could face criminal charges for identity theft and fraud. She was 16, old enough to be charged as an adult potentially. The thought of my daughter having a criminal record, of potentially facing jail time, was terrifying. I begged them not to file a report. I promised that Emma would face serious consequences at home, that this would never happen again. They eventually agreed not to pursue it, but they noted it in their system. If anything like this ever happened again with any family member, they wouldn't be so lenient. When I told Emma how close she'd come to being arrested, she broke down completely. I don't think she'd fully understood the severity of what she'd done until that moment. She kept saying she was sorry, that she'd been so stupid, that she didn't think about the consequences. We ended up in family therapy, which was probably something we should have been doing years ago anyway. The therapist helped us work through what had happened and why. Emma had issues around feeling different from her peers, around being raised by a single dad without the material things a lot of her friends had. She'd felt pressure to fit in, and she'd made a terrible choice in how to deal with that pressure. But the therapist also pointed out my role in this. Not that I'd done anything wrong exactly, but that maybe I hadn't been paying enough attention to Emma's social and emotional needs. I'd been focused on keeping a roof over our heads and food on the table, on making sure she was physically safe and her homework was done. But I'd missed that she was struggling with feeling left out and inadequate compared to her friends. It's been 3 months since all of this came to light. Emma is still grounded, though we've relaxed some restrictions as she's shown she understands the gravity of what she did. She got a part-time job and is paying me back from her paychecks, $20 at a time. At that rate, it'll take years for her to pay back the full $8,000, but that's the point. She needs to understand the real cost of her actions. Our relationship is different now. There's a wariness that wasn't there before, on both sides. I find myself second-guessing things, she tells me, wondering if she's lying. And I can see that she knows I don't fully trust her anymore, which makes her careful and guarded around me in a way she never was before. The therapist says trust can be rebuilt, but it takes time and consistent effort from both of us. Emma has to prove she's trustworthy, and I have to be willing to eventually trust her again. It's a process, and we're working through it. But I'd be lying if I said things were back to normal, or if I thought they ever fully would be. Something broke that day I found that credit card statement, and I don't know if it can be fully repaired. I hope it can. I hope in a few years we'll look back on this as a painful learning experience that ultimately made our relationship stronger. But right now, it just hurts. It hurts that my daughter could lie to me so easily. It hurts that she was willing to commit fraud rather than talk to me about feeling left out. It hurts that the trust we'd built over 16 years could be damaged so quickly. I still love her, of course. She's my daughter, and nothing will change that. But I'm mourning the version of our relationship that existed before all this. The easy trust, the assumption of honesty, the belief that we told each other everything. That's gone now, maybe forever, and that loss is almost as painful as the betrayal itself. Let's move to one more story, because there's something important about hearing how these situations play out, how people navigate the aftermath of betrayal. I'm 35 years old, and I've been married to my husband Jake for 7 years. We have 2 kids, a 5-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter. On paper, we have a good life. Nice house in the suburbs, stable jobs, healthy kids, the kind of life people work toward, the American dream or whatever. But 6 weeks ago, I found out that Jake has been living a double life for the past 2 years. It started with a strange phone call. A woman I didn't know called our home number, which almost nobody uses anymore, and asked to speak to Jake. I told her he was at work and asked if I could take a message. She hesitated, then said actually, maybe I could help her. She identified herself as Melissa, and she said she'd been trying to reach Jake about their son. Their son? I told her she must have the wrong number, that Jake didn't have any children except the 2 he had with me. She went quiet for a moment, then asked if I was Mrs. Carson. I said yes, and she said no. She definitely had the right number. She started explaining, and with every word she said, my world crumbled a little more. Melissa had met Jake 3 years ago at a conference. They'd had an affair that lasted several months. She'd gotten pregnant, and when she told Jake, he'd been supportive at first. He'd said he was going to leave me, that they'd be together, that he wanted to be involved in their child's life. But after their son was born, Jake had pulled back. He'd said he couldn't leave his family, that it was more complicated than he'd thought. He promised he'd still support their son financially, but he couldn't be a present father. He had his other family to think about. For the past 2 years, Jake had been sending Melissa money every month for child support. He'd also visited occasionally when he travelled for work, spending time with his son when he could. But lately, the money had stopped coming, and Melissa hadn't been able to reach him. She was calling because she was desperate, needed the support he'd promised, and didn't know what else to do. I asked her to prove what she was saying. She sent me photos. Pictures of Jake holding a baby, Jake with a toddler on his lap, Jake at a park with a little boy who had his eyes and his smile, pictures from birthday parties, from outings, from ordinary moments of a father with his son. I sat there looking at these photos on my phone, and I couldn't process what I was seeing. This was my husband. These were real moments from his life, and they were moments I knew nothing about. Days when I thought he was on business trips, he was actually with his other family. When Jake got home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open to all the photos Melissa had sent me. He walked in, saw what I was looking at, and I watched all the colour drain from his face. He tried to explain, but what explanation could possibly make sense? He'd cheated on me, gotten another woman pregnant, been paying child support for 2 years, and hidden all of it. He had another child, a son he'd never mentioned, who was growing up without his father being fully present in his life. I asked him how. How had he managed to hide this for so long? How had he lied so consistently, so completely? He said it had been easier than he'd expected. The business trips were real, he'd just extended some of them to visit Melissa and his son. The money had come from a separate account I didn't know about, one he'd opened specifically for child support. He'd kept everything compartmentalized, his life with me in one box, his life with them in another. I asked him if he loved her, if he wanted to be with her instead of me. He said no, that it had been a mistake, that he loved me and our children. Melissa was just, she was just what? I demanded. Just the mother of his child? Just someone he'd had an extended affair with and continued seeing for years? He couldn't answer that. Didn't have an answer that would make any sense or make any of this okay. The next few days were a blur. I was functioning on autopilot, taking care of our kids, going through the motions, while internally I was completely destroyed. Everything I'd thought I knew about my life was a lie. My marriage was a lie. My husband was a stranger who'd been playing a role while living a secret life. I talked to a lawyer. I wanted to know my options, what would happen if we divorced. The lawyer told me about splitting assets, about custody arrangements, about the process. It all felt surreal, like I was planning someone else's life. My friends and family were shocked when I told them. Nobody had suspected anything. Jake had been so good at maintaining the facade. To everyone outside our marriage, he was the perfect husband and father. Devoted, reliable, present. None of them could believe he'd been hiding something like this. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized there had been signs. Times when he'd been distant or distracted. Moments when he'd gotten defensive about his phone or his schedule. I'd brushed those moments off, trusted him, believed his explanations. I'd been so confident in our relationship that it never occurred to me to question him. That trust felt stupid now. I'd been so naive, so willing to believe the best, that I'd missed what was right in front of me. Melissa called me again a week after that first conversation. She apologized for how I'd found out. Said she wouldn't have called if she hadn't been desperate. We talked for a long time, comparing notes on Jake, on what he'd told each of us, on how he'd managed to keep both relationships going. She'd believed him when he said he was going to leave me. She'd thought they were going to be a family eventually. Finding out that he'd been lying to her too, that he'd never had any intention of leaving me, had broken her heart all over again. Neither of us were the villain in this story. We were both victims of Jake's lies. We'd both trusted him, believed him, built our lives around what he'd told us, and we'd both been betrayed. I still don't know what I'm going to do. Divorce seems inevitable. How do you come back from something like this? But there are our kids to think about, and Jake's other son. All 3 children deserve to have their father in their lives, even though their father is a liar who destroyed multiple families with his selfish choices. Some days I'm so angry I can barely see straight. Other days I'm just sad. Sad for the future I thought we'd have. Sad for our kids who'll grow up in a broken home. Sad for the life I'd been building that turned out to be built on lies. Jake has apologized repeatedly, said he'll do anything to make it right, that he wants to work on our marriage. But I don't know if I want to work on it. I don't know if I can ever trust him again. And without trust, what kind of marriage would we have anyway? Right now, we're living in the same house but essentially separated, sleeping in different rooms, barely speaking beyond logistics about the kids. I need space and time to figure out what I want, what's best for our children, what kind of life I want to build from here. People keep telling me to consider counselling, that maybe we can fix this. But I'm not sure I want to fix it. I'm not sure Jake deserves that chance. He didn't just make one mistake. He made thousands of them, every day for 2 years, every time he lied to me, every time he left to visit his other family, every time he looked me in the eye and pretended our life together was real. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Over and over, he chose to lie to me. He chose his own convenience and his desire to have everything he wanted over honesty and integrity. And now we're all living with the consequences of those choices. I don't know how this story ends. I don't know if I'll divorce him or try to make it work. I don't know what kind of relationship he'll have with his 3 children, or how I'll navigate being connected to him forever through our kids. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust anyone again, or if this experience has permanently broken something in me. What I do know is that betrayal changes you. It changes how you see the world, how you see other people, how you see yourself. I used to be someone who trusted easily, who believed people when they said they loved me. Now I'm someone who questions everything, who looks for hidden meanings, who assumes the worst. Maybe that will fade with time. Maybe I'll heal and learn to trust again. But right now, in the immediate aftermath of discovering my husband's secret life, I'm just trying to get through each day. Trying to be there for my kids. Trying to figure out who I am now that everything I thought I knew has been revealed as a lie. Trying to accept that the man I married, the father of my children, the person I built my life with, isn't who I thought he was. And trying to decide if I can live with that, or if it's time to walk away and start over completely. These are the stories that keep us up at night, the ones that make us think about our own lives, our own relationships, They're hard to hear, sometimes painful to process. But there's value in knowing we're not alone, in understanding that betrayal and heartbreak are universal human experiences, even if the details are different for everyone. If you're going through something similar, I want you to know that your feelings are valid, your pain is real, your anger, your sadness, your confusion, all of it is justified. And while it might not feel like it right now, you will get through this. It will take time, and it won't be easy, but you are stronger than you think. Take care of yourself, set boundaries, seek support from people who genuinely care about you, and remember that betrayal says everything about the person who betrayed you, and nothing about your worth or value as a person. You deserved honesty, you deserved loyalty, and the fact that someone failed to give you those things is their failure, not yours. These stories we've covered so far are just the beginning. There are so many more tales of betrayal and heartbreak, of families torn apart and trust destroyed. Let's keep going, because sometimes hearing these experiences helps us process our own. This next story is about something that happens more often than people realize. It's about discovering that your partner has been lying about their entire past, about who they really are. I'm 38 years old, and I met my husband Daniel 10 years ago at a friend's wedding. We hit it off immediately, spent the entire reception talking and dancing. He was charming and funny, had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room. Within months, we were serious. Within 2 years, we were married. Daniel told me he came from a small family. His parents had passed away when he was in his 20s. He was an only child, no extended family to speak of. It was sad, but it also meant that when we got married, it was really just about us and creating our own family. We had our friends, we had each other, and that seemed like enough. We built a good life together. Both had careers we enjoyed, bought a house, adopted a dog. We talked about having kids but weren't in a rush. Everything felt stable and happy. Daniel was attentive and thoughtful, remembered little things that mattered to me, made me laugh even on hard days. I felt lucky to have found him. That all changed 8 months ago when I got a Facebook message from a woman I didn't know. Her name was Sarah, and her message was strange. She said she was Daniel's sister, and she'd been looking for him for years. She'd finally found him through my Facebook profile, which had my married name and enough information for her to piece things together. She wanted to know if I could help her get in contact with him. I stared at that message for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Daniel didn't have a sister. He didn't have any siblings. This had to be some kind of mistake or maybe even a scam. But something made me respond. I told her she must have the wrong person, that my husband Daniel was an only child. She sent me a photo. It was Daniel, maybe 15 years younger, standing with a woman who looked about his age. They were clearly at some kind of family gathering, both smiling at the camera. The resemblance between them was obvious once you were looking for it. Same eyes, same smile. I called Daniel at work immediately, asked him to come home, said it was important. He sounded worried, asked if I was okay, if something had happened. I told him I needed to talk to him in person, that it couldn't wait. When he got home, I showed him the Facebook message and the photo. I watched his face carefully, looking for surprise or confusion. Instead, what I saw was recognition, followed by something that looked like resignation. He sat down heavily on the couch and put his head in his hands. Then he started talking, and everything I thought I knew about my husband turned out to be wrong. Daniel did have a sister. He also had a brother. His parents were alive, living in another state. He came from a large extended family with aunts, uncles, cousins. He hadn't been estranged from them because of some tragic circumstances. He'd cut them off deliberately, changed his phone number, moved across the country, and built a new life where they couldn't find him. Why? I demanded. Why would he do that? Why would he lie to me about something so fundamental? The story he told me was complicated. He said his family was toxic, controlling, emotionally abusive. His parents had expectations he couldn't meet. His siblings were enmeshed in dysfunctional dynamics. He said he'd tried to set boundaries, tried to have a healthy relationship with them, but it had been impossible. So he'd made the decision to cut them out entirely, to start fresh. But why lie to me? I asked. Why not just tell me the truth, that he had a family he wasn't in contact with? People have estranged families all the time. I would have understood and supported him. He said he was afraid I wouldn't, afraid I'd try to fix things, to encourage reconciliation, to believe that families should stick together no matter what. He said it had been easier to just pretend they didn't exist than to constantly defend his decision to stay away from them. I felt like I didn't know the person sitting in front of me. For 10 years, I'd believed a fundamental lie about who he was. Every time he'd mentioned being an only child, every time he'd said his parents were dead, every time he'd acted like he had no family in the world, he'd been lying directly to my face. I told him I needed space to think. I went to stay with a friend for a few days while I tried to process what I'd learned. During that time, I responded to Sarah's message and agreed to talk to her on the phone. Sarah was kind, confused, and hurt. She said she'd been looking for Daniel for almost 8 years, ever since he'd disappeared from their lives. One day he was there, and the next he was gone. Changed his number, didn't tell anyone where he was moving, cut off all contact. She said their parents were devastated, that they'd tried everything to find him, to understand what they'd done wrong. I asked her about the abuse Daniel had described. She seemed genuinely shocked. She said their family wasn't perfect, that they'd had their share of problems like any family, but there had never been abuse. Their parents had been supportive, maybe overprotective at times, but they'd loved their children and tried their best. She said Daniel had always been someone who wanted to be in control, who didn't like being questioned or challenged. When their parents had expressed concern about some of his choices in his mid-20s, about his drinking and his impulsive decisions, he'd taken it as criticism and attacks. Rather than work through it, he'd simply cut them out. I didn't know what to believe. Daniel said his family was abusive. Sarah said they weren't. Both of them seemed sincere. But one of them had to be lying, or at least seriously misremembering the situation. When I went back home to talk to Daniel again, I told him about my conversation with Sarah. He was angry that I'd spoken to her, said she was manipulative and couldn't be trusted. He said of course she'd deny the abuse, that's what abusive families do. He accused me of taking her side over his. I told him I wasn't taking anyone's side. I was trying to understand the truth, and the truth was that he'd lied to me for our entire relationship about something huge. Even if everything he'd said about his family was accurate, even if they really were as awful as he claimed, he should have trusted me enough to tell me the truth. We went to couples counselling. The therapist tried to help us navigate this, to understand each other's perspectives. Daniel maintained that he'd done what he had to do to protect himself, and that lying to me about his family had been an extension of that self-protection. If I'd known the truth, he might have been pressured to reconnect with them, or I might have looked at him differently. But I did look at him differently now. How could I not? If he could lie about something this significant for this long, what else had he lied about? Could I trust anything he'd told me about his past, his feelings, his intentions? We tried to make it work, spent months in therapy, trying to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Daniel agreed to be more honest going forward, to stop hiding things from me, but the damage was done. Every time he told me something about himself or his past, I found myself wondering if it was true or just another convenient lie. The relationship became exhausting. I was constantly on guard, constantly analysing his words for inconsistencies. He was defensive and resentful, feeling like he was being punished for trying to protect himself from a toxic family. We were stuck in a cycle neither of us knew how to break. 8 months later, we're separated. Not divorced yet, but living apart, trying to figure out if there's any way to salvage this, or if the foundation of lies is too broken to build on. I honestly don't know which way it'll go. The saddest part is that I still love him. Or at least, I love the person I thought he was. The Daniel I married, the one who was an orphaned only child who'd built a life from scratch, that person doesn't exist. He was a character Daniel created to hide from his past. And I fell in love with a fiction. The real Daniel, the one with a living family and a complicated past he won't fully explain. I don't know if I love him. I don't know if I even know him well enough to love him. How can you love someone who's been lying to you since the day you met? I've thought a lot about what I would have done if he'd told me the truth from the beginning. If on one of our early dates he'd said he had a family, but wasn't in contact with them, that it was complicated and painful and he'd prefer not to talk about it. I think I would have respected that. I wouldn't have pushed. I would have waited until he was ready to share more. But he never gave me that chance. He decided for both of us that lying was the better option, and in doing so, he robbed us of the chance to build something real on a foundation of honesty. I've met his family now, actually. His sister Sarah and I kept in touch, and eventually I met their parents too. They seem like normal people dealing with the pain of having a son who abandoned them without explanation. Are they perfect? No. But I haven't seen any evidence of the abuse Daniel described, which means either he drastically exaggerated normal family conflict, or there are things that happen that his family isn't acknowledging. I'll probably never know the full truth, and that uncertainty, that inability to ever really know what happened and why, might be the hardest part of all of this. I'm left with questions that will never be answered, doubts that will never be resolved. What I've learned from this experience is that secrets and lies, even ones that seem justified at the time, have a way of poisoning everything they touch. Daniel thought he was protecting himself by lying about his family. Instead, he destroyed his marriage and any chance we had at real intimacy. Because intimacy requires honesty, it requires vulnerability and trust, and you can't have any of that when one person is hiding fundamental truths about who they are. I don't know what the future holds for me and Daniel. Maybe we'll find our way back to each other somehow. Maybe we'll divorce and move on with separate lives. But whatever happens, I know I'll never again accept someone's story at face value without asking questions. I'll never again assume that loving someone means I truly know them. Trust is earned through consistency and honesty over time. Daniel had my trust, and he betrayed it in the most fundamental way possible. That's not something that can be easily fixed or forgotten, and maybe it shouldn't be. Let's turn to another story now, one that shows how betrayal can come from the most unexpected places. I'm 52 years old, and I've worked at the same law firm for 25 years. Started as a paralegal right out of college, worked my way up to senior legal assistant, became an essential part of the team. The partners valued me, my colleagues respected me, and I took pride in my work. It was more than just a job. It was my career, my identity, a huge part of my life. About 5 years ago, we hired a new paralegal named Christine. She was 27, fresh out of school, eager and bright. I was assigned to train her, to show her the ropes and help her settle into the position. I took that responsibility seriously. I remembered what it was like to be young and overwhelmed in a law office, so I tried to be patient and supportive. Christine was a fast learner. She picked up procedures quickly, asked good questions, and wasn't afraid to admit when she didn't know something. We developed a good working relationship that gradually became a friendship. We'd have lunch together, chat about our lives, support each other through the stresses of the job. She told me about her difficult family situation, about student loans that were crushing her financially, about her dreams of eventually going to law school. I sympathized and offered advice when I could. I'd been through my own struggles early in my career, and I wanted to help her avoid some of the mistakes I'd made. About 2 years ago, one of the partners, Mr. Harrison, started giving me weird vibes. Nothing I could point to specifically, just a feeling that he was watching me more closely, questioning my work more than usual. I'd been at the firm for 23 years at that point. My work was solid. But suddenly Mr. Harrison was finding small errors, asking me to redo things that were already fine, generally making me feel like I was under a microscope. I mentioned it to Christine one day over lunch. She was sympathetic, said she'd noticed Mr. Harrison had been in a bad mood lately, suggested it probably wasn't about me specifically. I appreciated her support, but the feeling that something was wrong kept growing. A few months later, I was called into a meeting with Mr. Harrison and another partner, Miss Chen. They told me there had been concerns about my performance. Errors in documents I prepared, missed deadlines, work that wasn't up to the firm's standards. They had documentation of issues going back several months. I was shocked. I'd never had performance problems in all my years at the firm. I asked to see the documentation, and when they showed it to me, I was confused. Some of it was legitimate, small errors that could happen to anyone, but some of it was things I knew I'd done correctly, documents I'd carefully checked that were now showing mistakes. Deadlines I distinctly remembered meeting that were logged as missed. I tried to defend myself, but they had dates and evidence. They said they wanted to put me on a performance improvement plan that I'd have 90 days to bring my work back up to standard. If I couldn't, they'd have to consider other options, which was corporate speak for firing me. I was devastated. I went home that night and cried, feeling like my entire career was crumbling for reasons I didn't understand. I started going over my work obsessively, checking and rechecking everything, staying late to make sure nothing could be questioned. During this time, Christine was my main source of support. She'd reassure me, tell me the partners were being unfair, encourage me to keep fighting. She said she'd noticed that Mr. Harrison had been giving her more responsibilities lately, and she felt guilty about it, like maybe he was shifting work away from me and giving it to her. I told her not to feel guilty, that it wasn't her fault. The 90-day review period was a nightmare. I was so stressed I could barely sleep. Every morning I'd wake up with anxiety about what might go wrong that day, and things did keep going wrong. More errors would appear in my work. More deadlines would somehow get missed, even though I was certain I'd met them. It was like I was losing my mind. At the end of the 90 days, I was called into another meeting. The partners said my performance hadn't improved enough. They were going to have to let me go. After 25 years with the firm, I was being fired for performance issues I didn't understand. I was escorted to my desk to pack my things while a partner watched. It was humiliating. As I was gathering my belongings, I noticed something. One of my drawers was slightly open, and inside I could see some files that shouldn't be there. Files that had deadlines I'd supposedly missed. I pulled them out, confused. The deadline stamps on them showed they'd been completed and filed on time. But according to the documentation the partners had shown me, these same files had been logged as late. Something didn't add up. I asked the partner who was supervising my departure if I could take these files to HR. He seemed uncomfortable, but agreed. We went to the HR director's office, and I showed her what I'd found. She looked concerned and said she'd need to investigate. I left the building that day not knowing what would happen, but feeling like something bigger was going on than just my performance issues. It took 2 weeks, but eventually the HR director called me. She asked if I could come in for a meeting. When I arrived, she had Mr. Harrison and Miss Chen there, along with the firm's managing partner. The HR director explained what their investigation had uncovered. Someone had been systematically sabotaging my work, changing dates on documents after I'd filed them, removing things from my computer's task management system, even editing some of my completed work to add errors after I'd finished. And the person who'd been doing it was Christine. I couldn't believe it. Christine, who I'd trained and mentored. Christine, who'd been my friend and support system. She'd been destroying my career while pretending to care. The investigation had found digital fingerprints. Christine had been accessing my computer when I was away from my desk, using knowledge she'd gained from working closely with me to bypass my security. She'd been careful, but not careful enough. IT had been able to trace the changes back to her. When confronted, she'd confessed. She said she'd wanted my job. She'd realized that the senior legal assistant position paid significantly more than her paralegal salary and had more prestige. She'd decided the best way to get promoted was to make me look incompetent so there would be an opening. She'd been methodical about it. Started with small things to plant seeds of doubt about my performance, gradually escalated to bigger issues, all while playing the supportive friend, gaining my trust, learning my systems so she could better sabotage me. The HR director apologized profusely, said the firm took full responsibility for not catching this sooner, for not investigating more thoroughly when the performance issues first came up. They offered me my job back immediately with back pay for the time I'd been terminated. They also offered to pay for counselling to help me deal with the emotional impact of what had happened. Christine was fired, obviously. They also reported her to the State Bar Association, since her actions involved falsifying legal documents, which could prevent her from ever becoming a lawyer like she dreamed. The firm was considering pressing criminal charges as well for the computer access violations. I took my job back, but things were different. How could they not be? I'd been betrayed by someone I'd trusted, someone I'd helped and mentored. I'd lost 2 weeks of pay and benefits, but more importantly, I'd lost my sense of security and trust in my workplace. My reputation at the firm had taken a hit too, even though it wasn't my fault. People had heard about the performance issues before they heard about the sabotage. Some colleagues were supportive and outraged on my behalf. Others were distant, like they weren't sure what to believe. I struggled to focus on work. Every time someone approached my desk, I'd tense up. I started locking my computer obsessively, even if I was just walking to the printer. I became paranoid about my files and my work, constantly checking and rechecking everything. Eventually, I started seeing a therapist to work through the trauma of what had happened. She helped me understand that this was a form of workplace violence, that my trust had been violated in a profound way, and that it was normal to struggle with the aftermath. It's been 3 years now. I'm still at the firm, though I've thought about leaving many times. Part of me feels like I shouldn't let Christine's actions drive me away from a career I'd built over decades, but part of me will never feel completely safe there again. I don't mentor new employees anymore. I don't make friends at work. I keep professional boundaries firmly in place and don't let anyone get close. It's lonely, and it's not the way I used to operate, but it's what I need to do to protect myself. The saddest part is that Christine's actions didn't just affect me. She destroyed her own career prospects in that field. She burned bridges with a prestigious firm. She'll have the sabotage and the ethics violation following her forever. And for what? A job she might have been able to earn legitimately in a few more years with hard work and patience? She threw away her integrity, her relationships, and her future for a shortcut that ultimately led nowhere, and she took my sense of security and trust with her. I wish I could say I've completely recovered, that I'm back to my old self, but I'm not sure that person exists anymore. The experience changed me, made me more guarded, more suspicious. I see potential threats where I used to see opportunities for connection. Maybe that's wisdom, maybe it's damage. Probably it's both. All I know is that I'll never again assume someone's friendship is genuine just because they act friendly. I'll never again share information about my work or my life without considering how it might be used against me. And I'll never again train a new employee without wondering if I'm just giving them the tools to undermine me. That's what betrayal does. It doesn't just hurt in the moment. It changes how you move through the world, how you relate to others, how much of yourself you're willing to risk. And those changes might last forever. Another story now, because there are patterns in betrayal that repeat across different situations and relationships. I'm 45 years old, and I have 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, ages 20, 17 and 14. My ex-husband and I divorced 7 years ago after he had an affair. It was painful but amicable enough. We worked out custody, divided assets fairly, and agreed to co-parent effectively for the sake of the kids. For the past 5 years, I've been in a relationship with Marcus. He's 48, also divorced, with 2 kids of his own from his previous marriage. When we started dating, we were both clear that blending families would be a priority. We wanted to do it right, to make sure all the kids felt included and valued. Marcus is great with my kids. He came to their games and concerts, helped with homework, treated them with respect, while not trying to replace their father. My kids liked him, which was important to me. They were teenagers dealing with their parents' divorce, and I didn't want to force a relationship with someone they didn't connect with. About 2 years ago, Marcus and I started talking about getting engaged. We'd been together 3 years at that point. Our kids were getting along well, and it felt like the right time to make our commitment official. We agreed we'd tell all the kids first before making any formal announcements, make them feel like they were part of the decision. We planned a family dinner at my house, all 5 kids and the 2 of us. We were going to tell them together that we were thinking about getting married, ask how they felt about it. We wanted them to know their feelings mattered, that this was a family decision. The dinner was going well. The kids were in good moods. Everyone was talking and laughing. After we'd finished eating, Marcus cleared his throat and said he and I had something we wanted to discuss with everyone. That's when my 17-year-old daughter, Emma, said she had something to say first. She looked at me, then at Marcus, and her face was serious in a way that immediately made me nervous. Emma said she knew Marcus and I were probably about to tell everyone we were getting engaged. She said she was happy for us, that Marcus was a good guy, but she also said there was something we all needed to know first, something she'd been trying to figure out how to say for months. She looked at Marcus and said she knew he'd been messaging her older sister, my 20-year-old daughter Lauren, not just casual conversation, but inappropriate messages, flirtatious, suggestive messages that had made Lauren extremely uncomfortable. The table went completely silent. I looked at Marcus, expecting him to immediately deny it, to say Emma was mistaken or confused. Instead, his face went pale and he wouldn't meet my eyes. Lauren, my oldest, started crying. She said it was true. She said Marcus had started messaging her on social media about 6 months ago. At first, it had seemed innocent, just asking how she was doing, what was new in her life. But gradually his messages had become more personal, more intimate. He'd tell her she was beautiful, more mature than other girls her age. He'd say he felt like he could talk to her about things he couldn't discuss with anyone else. He'd complained about our relationship sometimes, said I didn't understand him the way Lauren did. Lauren said she'd been uncomfortable from the beginning but didn't know what to do. Marcus was my boyfriend, someone I cared about. She didn't want to ruin my happiness. She tried responding less, being less friendly in her replies, hoping he'd get the hint and stop. But he'd persisted. Started sending messages late at night. Would find ways to be alone with her when he came over, trying to have private conversations. Lauren had started avoiding family gatherings, making excuses not to be around when Marcus was there. Emma had noticed something was wrong with her sister, had eventually gotten Lauren to confess what was happening. The two of them had been trying to figure out what to do, how to tell me without devastating me. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Marcus, the man I'd trusted with my children, had been inappropriate with my daughter. My 20-year-old daughter who he'd known since she was a teenager? I turned to Marcus and asked if it was true. He started stammering, trying to explain. He said he'd just been trying to be a good stepdad, to have a relationship with Lauren. He said Emma was twisting things, making innocent conversations sound worse than they were. Lauren pulled out her phone and started reading messages. They were exactly as she'd described. Flirtatious, inappropriate, messages that no parent's partner should ever send to their partner's child. Some of them made me physically sick. I told Marcus to leave immediately. He tried to argue, to defend himself, but I cut him off. I told him he had 5 minutes to get out of my house or I'd call the police. He looked around the table at the kids' faces, all of them looking at him with disgust and shock, and finally left. After he was gone, I held Lauren while she cried. I apologized over and over for not seeing what was happening, for putting my kids in a situation where one of them felt unsafe in her own home. Emma sat next to us, looking relieved that the secret was finally out, but also sad about what it meant. The younger kids were confused and upset. My 14-year-old son kept asking what had happened, why Marcus had left, why everyone was crying. I had to explain in age-appropriate terms that Marcus had been inappropriate with Lauren, that he wasn't going to be coming around anymore. The next few weeks were a blur. I blocked Marcus on everything, changed the locks on my house in case he'd ever made copies of keys, talked to a therapist about whether Lauren needed to report what had happened to the authorities. Lauren decided she didn't want to press charges. The messages, while inappropriate and predatory, didn't cross into territory that was clearly illegal. She just wanted to move past it, to feel safe again. I supported her decision while also feeling torn. Part of me wanted Marcus to face consequences for what he'd done, but it was Lauren's choice to make, not mine. Marcus tried to contact me numerous times, left voicemails saying I was overreacting, that he'd never meant anything inappropriate, that the messages were being misinterpreted. He said Lauren had encouraged him, had liked the attention. I didn't listen to all of the messages. I couldn't stomach hearing him try to blame a 20-year-old girl for his own predatory behavior. He eventually stopped trying to reach me directly and started going through mutual friends, telling them I'd ended our relationship over a misunderstanding, implying that Lauren had misread his friendly intentions, trying to salvage his reputation while destroying mine and my daughter's in the process. A few friends believed him, or at least wanted to stay neutral. Those friendships ended. I couldn't maintain relationships with people who thought there was any acceptable explanation for a 46-year-old man sending flirtatious messages to his partner's 20-year-old daughter. But most people, once they heard the full story and saw some of the messages Lauren was willing to share, were horrified. They cut Marcus out of their lives too. He became persona non grata in our social circle. Lauren struggled after everything came out. She felt guilty, like she should have spoken up sooner. She worried that I blamed her somehow for what happened. I kept reassuring her that none of it was her fault, that Marcus was the adult who'd abused his position of trust. She started therapy to work through her feelings about the situation. The therapist said it was unfortunately common for predators to target children and young adults in their partners' families. They have built-in access, built-in trust, and can often manipulate the situation to make their victims feel complicit. That's what Marcus had been doing with Lauren, making her feel special, like they had a unique connection, while also making her feel responsible for maintaining that connection. Classic grooming behavior. The knowledge that I'd invited a predator into my home, into my children's lives, haunts me. I did background checks before getting serious with Marcus. Nothing concerning came up. But predators don't always have criminal records. Sometimes they've never been caught before. Or sometimes they're careful enough to stay just on the legal side of inappropriate while still causing immense harm. I've been single since ending things with Marcus 2 years ago. I've gone on a few dates but nothing serious. Part of me is terrified of bringing another person into my children's lives, of potentially exposing them to danger again. Even though I know logically that not every person is a predator, the fear is there. My relationship with my daughters is stronger than ever. They know they can tell me anything now, that I'll believe them and protect them. Emma said seeing how I reacted when she told me about Marcus made her feel safe, like she could trust me with hard truths. But my relationship with trust itself is broken. I don't know how to trust my own judgment about people anymore. If I could miss something this big with Marcus, what else might I be missing? How can I ever feel confident that someone is who they claim to be? These are questions I'm working through in my own therapy. Learning that trusting people always involves some risk, but that risk doesn't mean we should stop trusting entirely. Finding balance between protective paranoia and healthy openness. What happened with Marcus taught me and my children painful lessons about trust and betrayal, but it also taught us that we're a team, that we can face hard things together, that honesty matters more than keeping up appearances. I just wish we'd learned those lessons in a way that didn't involve someone trying to groom my daughter. That's a price no parent should ever have to pay for wisdom. One more story, because I think it's important to end on a note that shows both the depth of betrayal and the possibility of moving forward. I'm 60 years old now, and this story starts 15 years ago when I was 45. I'd been married to my husband Tom for 20 years at that point. We had 2 kids, both teenagers, and what I thought was a solid marriage. Not perfect, but good. We'd weathered the typical challenges of parenthood and middle age, and I believed we were in it for the long haul. Tom worked in sales, which meant he travelled frequently. Multiple trips per month, sometimes gone for a week at a time. I'd gotten used to it over the years. It was his job, it paid well, and I managed things at home while he was gone. We talked on the phone every night when he was travelling, shared updates about our days, maintained our connection despite the distance. One evening, when Tom was supposed to be on a business trip, I got a call from a hospital 3 states away. They said Tom had been in a car accident. Nothing life-threatening, but he'd been injured and needed surgery. They'd found my contact information in his wallet and wanted to let me know. I was immediately terrified. I asked which hospital, said I'd drive there right away. The nurse gave me the address and told me Tom was in surgery but would be out soon. I called my sister to come stay with the kids and started driving. During that long drive, I was focused entirely on getting to Tom, on making sure he was okay. But there was a small part of my brain that was confused. The hospital was in a city Tom had never mentioned visiting. His business trips were usually to the same handful of locations, and this wasn't one of them. When I finally got to the hospital, I went straight to the information desk and asked for Tom's room. They directed me to the surgical floor, and I found his room number. As I was walking down the hall, a woman came out of his room. She was about my age, attractive, and she'd clearly been crying. She saw me and stopped. We looked at each other for a moment, and I had this awful feeling in my gut that I couldn't explain. I asked if she knew Tom, if she was a friend. She asked who I was. I said I was his wife. The colour drained from her face. She said, very quietly, that she was his wife too. At first, I thought she was confused or mistaken. I laughed nervously and said no, I was Tom's wife. We'd been married for 20 years. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos. Her wedding photos with Tom. She said they'd been married for 8 years. I couldn't process what she was saying. It didn't make sense. Tom couldn't be married to both of us. That was illegal. That was impossible. But she kept showing me photos, proof of a life Tom had been living that I knew nothing about. Tom had been married to this woman, whose name was Patricia, for 8 years. They lived together in this city, in a house he'd bought. They had a 7-year-old son together. Patricia had believed she was Tom's only wife, that he travelled for work just like I'd believed. Tom had been living a double life for almost a decade. 2 wives, 2 families, 2 complete separate existences. He'd somehow managed to keep both going without either of us suspecting the truth. Patricia and I stood in that hospital hallway, both of us in shock, trying to piece together how this could have happened. We compared stories, timelines, travel schedules. Every time Tom had told me he was on a business trip, he'd been with Patricia. Every time he'd told her he was travelling for work, he'd been with me. He'd kept 2 calendars, 2 phones, 2 sets of credit cards. He'd built an entire infrastructure of lies. Patricia lived in the city where Tom's company was actually headquartered. I lived 3 hours away in the town where Tom had grown up. He'd somehow convinced both of us that his work required extensive travel when in reality he was just going back and forth between his 2 families. When Tom came out of surgery, both Patricia and I were there. He woke up to see both of his wives standing at the foot of his hospital bed, and the expression on his face was something I'll never forget. Pure terror, followed by resignation. He knew he'd been caught, and there was no way to explain this away. Neither of us was willing to leave. We both wanted answers. So Tom, still groggy from anesthesia, had to confess to both of us at the same time. He told us he loved both of us, that he'd never meant to hurt anyone. He'd met Patricia while on an actual business trip, fallen in love, and couldn't bring himself to leave either relationship. So he decided to have both. The logistics of how he'd managed it were staggering. He'd been working harder than either of us realised, taking on extra projects and overtime to fund 2 households. He'd use his travel schedule to justify his absences to both families. He'd created separate email accounts and social media profiles. He'd even told different stories about his extended family so that Patricia and I wouldn't accidentally cross paths at family events. Patricia and I both filed for divorce. We'd bonded through our shared betrayal, and we stayed in touch throughout the legal proceedings. It was surreal, sitting across from each other in lawyers' offices, dealing with the fact that we'd been sharing a husband for 8 years without knowing it. Tom tried to salvage one or both relationships at first, said he'd made a terrible mistake, but that he truly loved both of us, that we could work through this. Neither Patricia nor I were interested. How do you rebuild trust with someone who's been lying to you every single day for years? The divorce was complicated. Dividing assets when there were 2 wives, both entitled to marital property, was a legal nightmare. There were questions about bigamy charges, though ultimately Tom wasn't prosecuted. The laws around it were murky, and neither Patricia nor I wanted to put our children through a criminal trial. Tom's life fell apart. He lost both families, lost the respect of friends and colleagues who found out what he'd done. He lost his job because the company didn't want the publicity nightmare of having an employee who'd committed bigamy. He ended up moving to another state entirely, trying to start over. Patricia and I both rebuilt our lives. We stayed friends, which was odd but also comforting. We were the only 2 people who truly understood what we'd been through. We'd both been victims of the same elaborate deception, and that shared experience created a bond. Our children, Tom's children from both marriages, eventually met each other. They're half-siblings after all. It was awkward at first, but over the years they've developed relationships with each other. My kids have a half-brother they never knew existed. Patricia's son has older siblings he didn't know about. It's been 15 years now. I've rebuilt my life completely. I eventually did date again, even remarried a few years ago to a wonderful man who I've been incredibly cautious and thorough about vetting. The ability to trust didn't come back easily, but it did come back. Patricia remarried too. We still talk occasionally, checking in on each other's lives, commiserating about dealing with Tom when co-parenting issues come up. As for Tom, I hear updates through the kids sometimes. He never rebuilt the life he had, never remarried, lives alone, has minimal relationship with the children from both marriages. They're all adults now, and most of them have chosen to keep him at a distance. They love him because he's their father, but they don't trust him. They know what he's capable of. Looking back, there were signs I missed, times when Tom's stories didn't quite add up, moments when he was vague about details. But I trusted him. I had no reason not to trust him, and he exploited that trust completely. The experience taught me that betrayal isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's hidden in plain sight, wrapped in normalcy and routine. Sometimes the person you trust most is leading an entirely separate life you know nothing about. And sometimes the only way you find out is through random chance, like a car accident and a phone call to the wrong wife. But it also taught me that humans are remarkably resilient. Both Patricia and I survived what should have broken us. We healed, we grew, we learned to trust again. We found happiness after discovering that much of our lives had been based on lies. If there's any lesson to take from this, it's that betrayal, even profound and devastating betrayal, doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be a painful chapter, but there are more chapters to come. And those chapters can be beautiful, filled with genuine love and real trust, earned and reciprocated. It just takes time, and courage, and a willingness to believe that not everyone is like the person who hurt you, that there are people in the world who will be honest, who will be faithful, who will honour the commitments they make. Those people exist. I know because I found one, eventually, but only after learning the hard way that trust must be earned, not freely given. So there we are. Stories of betrayal in all its forms, from siblings who sleep with your fiancé to partners who live double lives, from co-workers who sabotage your career to parents who keep dangerous secrets. Betrayal touches all our lives eventually, in ways big and small. What matters is how we respond to it, how we heal from it, how we move forward despite it. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight, for listening to these difficult stories, for being part of this community of people trying to make sense of the complicated, painful aspects of being human. I hope these stories have helped you feel less alone if you're going through your own betrayal. I hope they've given you perspective on your own relationships, and I hope they've reminded you that healing is possible, even when the hurt feels permanent. Take care of yourself. Set boundaries with people who don't respect you. Value honesty above comfort. And remember that you deserve relationships built on truth, even when the truth is hard. Until next time, take care.